So I did a quick Google search and I found out that the average head weighs about 5 kilograms and not 7 to 8 as Hunter x Hunter stated, which means that instead of a head weighing about 16 pounds, 16 to 17 pounds, it actually weighs only about, I think about 11 and a half pounds, which unless like for some reason the Japanese head is much heavier, like 5 pounds heavier than your typical head, then really Hisoka swinging around is really only about 11 pounds or 5 kilograms. So today I'll be reviewing chapter 354 of Hunter x Hunter, titled Head, which I understand why it was important to state that a head has to weigh about 16 pounds or 7 to 8 kilograms, because if you're swinging a head at someone, it just doesn't seem as dangerous. Instead, it'd be more comparable and it would be a lot more dramatic, and the hyperbole would make sense, in which you're swinging like a bowling ball around and you're trying to swing at someone's head. But even though a head actually weighs like 5 pounds less than a bowling ball, it's still going to inflict quite a bit of damage, just not as nearly as much as a bowling ball would. So I really do understand why the author had to state that a head weighs 16 pounds at the beginning of the chapter. So we go back to the fight of Hisoka versus Chrollo, and now this chapter it's Hisoka's turn to really inflict some major damage. And so he begins by being in the air and twirling the head around and hitting Chrollo right in the side with the head. And so we're supposed to, in this entire chapter, it's best to imagine a bowling ball hitting his arm, in which the average human arm would just break off, especially at the velocity it's going. It doesn't state velocity or anything like that, but we have to imagine it's going pretty fast, especially because these are all hunters and they're supposed to be extremely powerful. So we can only imagine it's going very fast. So now it's Hisoka's turn to go for the offensive, and so he begins by swinging around the head along with using his cards, in which we can see them that he actually chops off their arms. At one point he's realizing that he can knock off all these heads, but because the audience is so massive, Chrollo has an unlimited army. And so Hisoka knocks out many of the puppets, and he takes one hostage. And so at this point, Chrollo is left with two options. Chrollo can either not dispel the stamp, in which he calls on the standby puppets to come and attack him, or he can dispel the stamp, in which after he dispels the stamp, he has two options. One, to create more using Gaurly Fake, or the second one, to disregard the stamp and go to convert hands. So as Hisoka is realizing this, he thinks that option 2 is going to be more likely, in which at the moment he says that, the stamp disappears from the puppet that he's holding hostage. And it's at this moment that Hisoka realizes that he really needs to strike, and he needs to figure out where Chrollo is, because Chrollo's in the audience. Chrollo can hide anywhere, he can change into anyone, and so he needs to look as quickly as possible and find the person. So Hisoka thinks that the best place Chrollo will be is with his puppets that were on standby. Hisoka then sees Chrollo right in the audience with the standby clones, and he begins to charge Chrollo. Now, what we don't know yet, and which I'm going to explain now, is that at this point Chrollo has used the antenna and void box to control an audience member, and then he has used convert hands to make the audience member look like Chrollo. During the running between Chrollo from Hisoka, it's important to realize that Chrollo is not doing anything. He's just dodging, he's avoiding Hisoka's attacks. And so it was important to realize that because Chrollo was not attacking, especially with his moves, this meant that Chrollo had to be an audience member. Why else would Chrollo not be using the book or be using any of his moves, especially using the Sun and Moon, because Sun and Moon are going to be the decisive move that kills Hisoka. In which actually, just letting you know, I'm actually rooting for Chrollo to win, not because that I don't like Hisoka. I think Hisoka is one of the greatest characters, but as of right now, Chrollo is a much more interesting character. He has a lot more better moves than Hisoka does, and the fights would be a lot more interesting watching Chrollo. But if Hisoka does win, that's gonna make it more interesting, because Hisoka is able to use just one move in such a variety of ways, in which it will be very impressive to see Hisoka continue fighting. So really, whoever wins, whoever dies, the winner is going to be a very epic character, and this is actually just a character development, and it's going to make us like the victor even more. At this point, after the little running between the two characters, Hisoka had attached bungee gum to about 5 audience members, in which the potential energy that from the audience members running away was then finally flung back into Chrollo, audience member Chrollo, and attacked him, and Hisoka was then able to continue attacking him, which was attaching the bungee gum to Chrollo's, I think it was his right arm, and flinging Chrollo towards Hisoka, in which he was able to use the head to inflict major damage. After the body falls to the floor, it's then realized that Chrollo was actually using Shadow Clone Jutsu, just kidding, but Chrollo was actually using basically an imitation of a Naruto technique to transport into someone else, and thus Chrollo is actually somewhere still in the audience, and he's actually most likely ready to use Sun and Moon. So within the next chapter, I'm thinking the next 2 chapters, the fight's going to be determined. I really do think that Chrollo is going to be the victor, in which he's going to use Sun and Moon to destroy Hisoka. Thank you for watching the video, and please subscribe. I'll be making more videos, and also watch my scientific videos. They're really interesting. I have a new one coming out, and it's going to be about the genetics and eugenics, and it's going to talk about some basic genetics that you learn in general biology, and then it's going to lead into a topic, eugenics, which is very interesting. I did not realize that there are so many eugenic laws in the United States. Please stay tuned for that as well. Thank you very much.